Imagine walking through the marble corridors of ancient Rome's most exclusive palace, where power and perversion intertwined like venomous serpents. Behind these golden doors lived a woman whose name would become synonymous with depravity, so shocking that even Romans, a civilization that invented the concept of decadence, recoiled in horror. Her name was Valeria Messalina, and she didn't just break the rules of imperial behavior, she obliterated them, crushed them underfoot, and danced on their remains with a smile that could seduce senators and terrify emperors. Born into the highest echelons of Roman nobility around 17 AD, Messalina possessed everything a woman could desire: breathtaking beauty that could stop conversations across crowded forums, intelligence sharp enough to manipulate the most cunning politicians, and most crucially, access to unlimited power through her marriage to Emperor Claudius. But here's where our story takes its first dark turn. Messalina didn't want power for political gain or social advancement. She craved something far more intoxicating, far more dangerous, and infinitely more scandalous. She wanted to push every boundary, shatter every taboo, and explore depths of human behavior that civilized society had agreed should remain forbidden. Picture Rome at its absolute peak of decadence. Streets filled with exotic spices from distant lands, gladiators battling to thunderous crowds, wine flowing like rivers through marble halls where senators debated the fate of nations. Even in this environment of legendary excess, Messalina's reputation grew like a malignant tumor, spreading whispers of shocking behavior from the Palatine Hill to the furthest reaches of the empire. The first signs of her extraordinary appetites emerged during lavish imperial banquets. While other noble ladies maintained proper decorum behind delicate veils and modest conversation, Messalina commanded attention like a predator marking territory. Witnesses described how she would openly proposition guests, engage in provocative displays that left hardened Roman veterans speechless, and demonstrate a complete disregard for the sacred traditions of imperial dignity. But these public exhibitions were merely appetizers for the feast of depravity that would follow. Messalina possessed an insatiable hunger that no amount of conventional pleasure could satisfy. She began organizing private gatherings in hidden chambers of the imperial palace, events so secretive and so shocking that participants swore blood oaths never to reveal what transpired behind those locked doors. Roman historians, typically reserved in their language and careful with accusations against imperial family members, abandoned their usual diplomatic tone when describing Messalina's nocturnal activities. Tacitus, the empire's most respected chronicler, wrote with barely concealed disgust about orgies that lasted for days, involving not just multiple partners, but elaborate rituals that combined religious ceremony with carnal excess in ways that defied comprehension. Yet Messalina's true genius lay not in simple hedonism, but in her ability to weaponize pleasure. She understood that in Rome, where political alliances shifted like desert sands, sexual favors could purchase loyalty more effectively than gold. Her private chambers became an ultimate seat of power, where senators, generals, and merchant princes competed not just for her attention, but for the political advantages that came with her imperial favor. The Empress developed an intricate system of rewards and punishments based entirely on her sexual whims. Those who pleased her found their careers advancing with mysterious speed. Political enemies discovered their reputations destroyed by whispered rumors of inadequacy or rejection. She wielded her sexuality like a master swordsman, cutting down obstacles and carving paths to greater influence, reinstating the characters of the character in Forceland. As months passed, Messalina's demands escalated beyond anything previously recorded in Roman history. She began hosting competitions between gladiators, not for combat skill, but for their ability to satisfy her increasingly exotic requirements. These contests attracted crowds of Rome's most jaded aristocrats, who watched in fascination and horror as their empress pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. The imperial palace transformed into something resembling a temple dedicated to forbidden pleasures. Rooms were redesigned specifically for Messalina's experiments. equipped with devices and furnishings that served purposes no respectable Roman would discuss in public. Foreign merchants arrived bearing exotic aphrodisiacs and mysterious substances from distant lands, all destined for the Empress's private collection. Meanwhile, Emperor Claudius remained either blissfully unaware or deliberately ignorant of his wife's activities. Some historians suggest he knew perfectly well what transpired in those sealed chambers, but chose to look the other way, perhaps recognizing that Messalina's sexual adventures kept her distracted from more dangerous political ambitions. Others argue that Claudius, portrayed by some as a stammering fool, but actually possessing considerable intelligence, was gathering evidence for a future reckoning. What happened next would cement Messalina's reputation as history's most sexually audacious empress, and simultaneously seal her doom. Because even in Rome, where excess was celebrated as art and debauchery considered sophisticated entertainment, there were lines that should never be crossed. Messalina was about to obliterate those lines with such spectacular boldness that the aftershocks would ripple through history for 2,000 years. The catalyst for this legendary scandal emerged from Messalina's growing boredom with conventional conquests. Having exhausted the novelty of seducing senators, corrupting military commanders, and orchestrating elaborate orgies, she craved a challenge worthy of her imperial status. That challenge presented itself in the form of Scylla, Rome's most celebrated courtesan. Scylla wasn't just any prostitute. She was an institution, a woman whose reputation for sexual prowess was so legendary, but wealthy Romans would travel from distant provinces just to witness her performances. Her clientele included former consuls, successful merchants, even visiting foreign dignitaries, who considered an encounter with Scylla essential to understanding Roman culture. But the exact circumstances of how their rivalry began remain shrouded in mystery, but contemporary accounts suggest it started as casual boasting during one of Messalina's infamous dinner parties. Perhaps influenced by excessive wine, or simply driven by her competitive nature, the Empress allegedly claimed that no woman in Rome could match her stamina or creativity in matters of physical pleasure. Scylla, present at this gathering and never one to back down from a challenge, particularly one that questioned her professional reputation, responded with a counterclaim that sparked gasps throughout the dining hall. She proposed a direct competition to settle the matter once and for all. Who could accommodate more partners in a single day and night? The room fell silent. Even by Roman standards, this suggestion crossed into territory that civilized society avoided. Yet Messalina, far from being offended or retreating from such an audacious challenge, smiled with predatory delight and immediately accepted. What followed was 24 hours that would be whispered about in Roman taverns for generations. Word of the competition spread through the city like wildfire, reaching every level of society, from slave quarters to senatorial palaces. Betting pools emerged overnight. Crowds gathered in nearby streets, hoping to catch glimpses of the participants arriving at the designated venue. Messalina had chosen a luxurious villa on the outskirts of Rome, far enough from the Imperial palace to maintain a thin veneer of deniability, but close enough to the city center to ensure maximum attendance from Rome's social elite. The building was transformed into an arena of sorts, with separate chambers for each competitor, and a common area where witnesses could observe and verify the proceedings. The participants began arriving at dawn, a steady stream of men from every social class imaginable, gladiators whose physical prowess was legendary, young aristocrats seeking adventure and bragging rights, seasoned veterans attracted by the novelty of the situation, even foreign visitors who had heard rumors and traveled specifically to participate in this unprecedented event. As the competition commenced, both women approached their task with the dedication of Olympic athletes. This wasn't casual pleasure-seeking, but a systematic, almost military campaign designed to achieve maximum efficiency and endurance. Messalina, drawing upon years of experience pushing boundaries, demonstrated techniques that amazed even the jaded Roman spectators. Hour after hour, the competition continued, Witnesses maintained careful tallies, recording each encounter with the meticulousness typically reserved for Senate voting records or military casualty reports. The Imperial physician stood ready to intervene if either competitor showed signs of dangerous exhaustion, while servants provided food, wine, and other necessities to maintain the participants' strength. By midday, word had reached the highest levels of Roman government. Senators interrupted their sessions to receive updates. Military commanders postponed strategic meetings to discuss the implications of their empress's behavior. Even Emperor Claudius, typically insulated from palace gossip by layers of advisors and protocol, could no longer ignore reports of his wife's public exhibition. As evening approached, both competitors showed signs of fatigue, but neither would concede defeat. Messalina, driven by imperial pride and years of never accepting limitations, continued with relentless determination. Scylla, fighting for her professional reputation and the substantial prize money at stake, matched the Empress's pace with equal dedication. The final hours of the competition attracted Rome's most influential citizens, who arrived to witness what they correctly understood would be a historical moment. Former consuls stood alongside wealthy merchants, military heroes rubbed shoulders with celebrated artists, and foreign ambassadors took mental notes for reports to their distant kings. When dawn finally broke, ending the agreed-upon time limit, both women had achieved numbers that staggered even the most experienced witnesses. But Messalina had emerged victorious, her total exceeding Scylla's by a margin that left no room for dispute or challenge. The immediate aftermath was electric with excitement and horror. Participants and spectators alike understood they had witnessed something unprecedented in human history, yet celebration quickly gave way to sobering realization of what had actually transpired. The Empress of Rome, the woman who represented the empire's dignity and moral authority, had publicly engaged in behavior that reduced her to the level of a common prostitute. Victory in her notorious competition should have satisfied Messalina's craving for pushing boundaries, but instead it seemed to awaken something even more dangerous within her. Having conquered every sexual frontier available to a Roman empress, she turned her attention toward political territory that was infinitely more treacherous. What she did next would transform her from a scandalous footnote in imperial history into an existential threat to the Roman Empire itself. The Empress had grown increasingly contemptuous of her husband, Emperor Claudius, viewing him as a stuttering fool who failed to appreciate her extraordinary appetites and ambitions. She began surrounding herself with young, attractive men who possessed both political connections and the physical attributes she found irresistible. Among these was Gaius Silius, a stunningly handsome senator whose family lineage traced back to the Roman Republic's most honored traditions. Silius represented everything Messalina found lacking in her imperial husband. Where Claudius was aging and physically unremarkable, Silius possessed the kind of masculine beauty that stopped conversations in the forum, where the emperor seemed content with administrative duties and scholarly pursuits. The young senator burned with political ambition and dreams of glory that matched Messalina's own grandiose visions. Their affair began conventionally enough, following patterns Messalina had established with dozens of previous lovers. Messalina did not know what was found, nor secret meetings in hidden chambers, passionate encounters that left both participants breathless and craving more, elaborate gifts exchanged to demonstrate growing affection and commitment. But unlike her other dalliances, this relationship evolved beyond mere physical attraction into something far more dangerous. Genuine emotional attachment combined with shared political aspirations. Silius whispered seductive suggestions about what they could accomplish together if freed from the constraints of her marriage to Claudius. He painted vivid pictures of a new dynasty they could establish, one based on youth, beauty, and ruthless ambition, rather than the careful compromises and bureaucratic procedures favored by the current emperor. These conversations, initially dismissed as passionate pillow talk, gradually took root in Messalina's imagination. The Empress began testing boundaries in ways that terrified her closest advisors. She appeared publicly with Silius at events where protocol demanded she attend with her husband. She openly displayed affection for her lover in settings where imperial dignity required her to maintain proper distance from all men except Claudius. Most shocking of all, she began making statements that implied her current marriage was somehow temporary or conditional. As their relationship deepened, Messalina and Silius developed increasingly elaborate fantasies about their future together. They imagined eliminating Claudius through poison, accident, or political maneuvering, then ruling jointly as Emperor and Empress in a new golden age of Roman glory. These conversations, overheard by servants and reported to various interested parties, sent waves of panic through the imperial court. The tipping point came when Claudius announced his departure from Rome for an extended visit to Ostia, the empire's primary port city, to oversee critical grain shipments that would feed the capital through the coming winter. This absence, expected to last several weeks, presented Messalina and Silius with an opportunity they couldn't resist. During one of their secret meetings, Silius made a proposal that was simultaneously brilliant and catastrophically stupid. Why not formalize their relationship through marriage while Claudius was away? Roman law was complex regarding divorce and remarriage, particularly for imperial family members, but precedents existed that might legitimize such a union if properly executed. Messalina's response revealed the extent to which power and passion had corrupted her judgment. Instead of recognizing this suggestion as treason punishable by death, she embraced it as the ultimate expression of their love and shared ambition. They would marry immediately, publicly, and with sufficient ceremony to establish legal precedent for their union. The wedding ceremony they organized was magnificent in its audacity and terrifying in its implications. Rather than a secretive affair conducted in hidden chambers, they chose to celebrate their union with full traditional Roman rituals at a prominent villa within sight of the city walls. Invitations were sent to prominent citizens, including senators who were torn between curiosity about this unprecedented event and terror at being associated with obvious treason. On the appointed day, Messalina arrived dressed as a bride, with all the grandeur appropriate to her imperial status. She wore robes of finest silk, jewelry worth more than most Romans would earn in their lifetimes, and a crown that symbolically declared her continued claim to empress status, even while marrying another man. Silius appeared equally magnificent, dressed in senatorial robes enhanced with decorations that suggested imperial aspirations. The ceremony proceeded with traditional Roman religious observances, complete with sacrifices to the gods, exchange of vows that legally bound the couple, and a feast that lasted well into the night. Witnesses described an atmosphere of surreal celebration mixed with underlying terror. Guests understood they were participating in an event that would be remembered throughout Roman history, but none could predict whether they would be celebrated as witnesses to a new dynasty or executed as accomplices to treason. The newly married couple made no attempt to hide their union or its implications. They openly discussed plans for governing Rome together, spoke of reforms they would implement once Claudius was removed from power, and behaved in every respect as though their marriage had instantly transformed them into legitimate rulers of the empire. News of the wedding reached Claudius within days of the ceremony. Messengers raced to Ostia, carrying reports that left the emperor stunned, furious, and faced with the most serious challenge to his authority since ascending to power. His response would determine not only Messalina's fate, but the future stability of the Roman Empire itself. The news of Messalina's marriage hit Emperor Claudius like a thunderbolt from Jupiter himself. According to historical accounts, the normally composed ruler suffered what appeared to be a complete emotional breakdown when informed that his wife had not merely betrayed him sexually, something he might have tolerated, but had committed an act of treason so brazen it threatened the very foundations of imperial authority. Claudius found himself trapped in a nightmare scenario with no good options. Ignoring Messalina's actions would signal weakness that could inspire other ambitious nobles to challenge imperial power. Yet moving against his own wife would create a scandal that would reverberate throughout the empire and potentially destabilize his reign. Every choice available to him carried devastating consequences. The emperor's advisors, led by the calculating Narcissus, seized this moment to eliminate what they had long viewed as a dangerous threat to imperial stability. They had watched Messalina's increasingly reckless behavior with growing alarm, understanding that her actions reflected poorly on Claudius's ability to maintain control even within his own household. This marriage provided the perfect justification for permanently removing her from the political equation. Narcissus crafted his arguments with surgical precision, emphasizing that Messalina's actions constituted not just personal betrayal, but an existential threat to Roman civilization itself. He painted vivid pictures of what would happen if other imperial family members followed her example, creating multiple competing claims to power and potentially triggering civil wars that could tear the empire apart. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Messalina and Silius were living in a fantasy bubble that divorced them completely from political reality. They spent their days making elaborate plans for their joint reign, discussing administrative reforms they would implement, and identifying potential enemies who would need to be eliminated once they secured power. Their behavior suggested they genuinely believed their marriage had somehow magically transformed them into legitimate rulers. This delusion extended to their social circle, where sycophants and opportunists encouraged their grandiose visions while secretly preparing escape plans for when reality inevitably crashed down around them. The villa where they had celebrated their wedding became an alternate court, where Messalina held audiences, received petitions, and behaved in every respect as though she were already empress in her own right, rather than the treasonous wife of the actual emperor. The couple's supporters included a dangerous mixture of ambitious young nobles who saw opportunity in the chaos, disgruntled senators who harbored their own grievances against Claudius, and various hangers-on who hoped to benefit from any change in imperial leadership. This coalition provided Messalina and Silius with enough reinforcement to maintain their delusions, while simultaneously ensuring their actions would be viewed as an organized conspiracy rather than mere personal indiscretion. When Claudius finally returned to Rome, he arrived with a military escort that left no doubt about his intentions. The emperor, who had seemed weak and indecisive, now moved with the ruthless efficiency of a man whose survival depended on swift, decisive action. He had decided that Messalina's betrayal demanded the ultimate punishment, not just for her personal crimes, but as a warning to anyone else who might consider challenging imperial authority. The confrontation that followed was swift and brutal. Claudius ordered immediate arrests of everyone connected to the illegal marriage, from the primary participants to the servants who had helped organize the ceremony. Roman soldiers surrounded the villa where Messalina had been holding court, cutting off all escape routes and ensuring that none of the conspirators could flee to seek sanctuary in foreign lands. Messalina's final hours revealed the complete collapse of her carefully constructed fantasy world. Faced with armed soldiers and the reality of her situation, she experienced what witnesses described as a complete emotional breakdown. The woman who had fearlessly pushed every social and sexual boundary now pleaded desperately for mercy, offering to renounce her marriage to Silius and return to dutiful behavior as Claudius's wife. But her appeals fell on deaf ears. Claudius had moved beyond anger into a cold, calculating fury that demanded complete resolution. He understood that allowing Messalina to survive would create endless future complications, as she would undoubtedly attempt other schemes to seize power. The only safe course was permanent elimination of the threat she represented. Silius faced execution with more dignity than his bride, perhaps understanding that his fate had been sealed the moment he agreed to marry an empress. Roman records describe his final moments as those of a man who had gambled everything on an impossible dream and lost, but who maintained his aristocratic composure, even facing death. Messalina's execution was carried out with the efficiency typical of Roman justice. but without the public spectacle usually associated with such high-profile cases. Claudius ordered that she be killed quietly, perhaps hoping to minimize the scandal that had already damaged his reputation throughout the empire. Her death marked the end of one of the most extraordinary and destructive imperial careers in Roman history. The aftermath of Messalina's downfall sent shockwaves throughout Roman society that lasted for generations. Her name became synonymous with unbridled sexuality and political recklessness, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing personal desires to override political wisdom. Future emperors and empresses would remember her fate when tempted to push boundaries beyond acceptable limits. Yet Messalina's legacy extended beyond mere scandal. She had demonstrated that even in Rome, where sexual freedom was generally accepted and political maneuvering was considered an art form, there were lines that could not be crossed without facing devastating consequences. Her story became a permanent reminder that power, no matter how absolute it might appear, always operates within constraints that wise leaders ignore at their peril. The villa where she had celebrated her illegal marriage was demolished on Claudius's orders, and its grounds were consecrated to prevent future construction. This symbolic destruction represented the emperor's determination to erase all traces of his wife's treasonous actions, while simultaneously serving as a permanent monument to the consequences of challenging imperial authority. Messalina's children faced uncertain fates in the aftermath of their mother's execution. Britannicus, a son with Claudius, remained in line for imperial succession, but would eventually fall victim to political machinations orchestrated by his stepmother Agrippina. Her daughter Octavia would later marry Emperor Nero, only to face execution when she became an obstacle to his own scandalous desires. Thus ended the reign of Rome's most sexually notorious empress, a woman whose appetites were so legendary they shocked a civilization that had invented the concept of decadence. Her story serves as an eternal reminder that even unlimited power cannot protect those who confuse personal desires with political wisdom, and that empires built on strength and discipline will ultimately destroy leaders who threaten their foundational principles through reckless self-indulgence.